from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll appear here in my chat room and we can talk directly. I hope you're having a wonderful day. And today we're going to talk about some of my existing and future books. It was suggested to me that this would be a good topic for today, and I thought I would run with it. And hello to Rev Michael in the chat room. And I have to say it's a good thing that you can't see me on the camera before the broadcast starts, because you'd have seen me here going through one type in after another, looking for just the right one to go with this tie. It was rather a long search, but of course I would do that. If you know me, you wouldn't be surprised that I was sitting here going through all my tie tags, looking for just the right one. So it was suggested to me that I might talk a little bit about how I'm doing. I think I've talked about the fact that my health is improving, that I'm feeling better than I have in a long time, and also, how I'm living. And the suggestion was made that I might talk a little bit about my income. And my income is mostly from Patreon, from psychic readings, and from the sale of books. And that's how we came to books for today's conversation. I've written a lot of books in my time. I've also written a lot of articles in my time, some of which in the fullness of time may themselves become books. And a lot of my books are available at CorellianPublishing.com. And I guess we'll go through a number of them and talk about what they are, and also those books that are coming. And meantime, of course, if you like my work, you want to support me in doing that work, Patreon is the best way. You can find my Patreon at revdonlewis.com. And I'm hoping to beef that up as the new year goes forward. Hello to Kazan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kazan. I'm not certain if I'm pronouncing Kazan correctly or if it's Zane. I've heard it pronounced Zane, which actually makes sense to me. Maybe that's what I should start saying. But either way, good afternoon. It's great to see you. I do try to get people's names right. I don't always succeed, but I try. So going back to books, and you can find Corellian Publishing at CorellianPublishing.com. Obviously, the main books that we have there, and hello to Janet in the chat room, are the Corellian Wicca degree lesson books. And that's first degree, second degree, third degree. And these are Kazan says, that's okay, you can call me Dragon. It's easier to say Dragon than Kazan. I will try to remember that. Let me write that down on one of my numerous lists of things to remember. My external hard drive, if you would. But the degree lessons are exactly what they sound like. And each one of them consists of 12 main lessons with various subparts. And these are the most recent update, going back a couple of years. Heavily illustrated, lots of illustrations to help people to better understand, for example, the visualizations that are included, the different charts and so forth that help to understand the terminology, the way that things work. Very highly illustrated. And one of the reasons I decided to do that, in addition to the fact of being an artist and just enjoying illustrating things, I felt that many of the things we talk about in the books are difficult to convey exclusively through words. So I wanted to include pictures to make some of these things clearer, some of the energy workings, for example. how exactly you create certain energetic batteries. Um, Now, I realize that's a two-edged sword because being too explicit in how to do this um, goes against the fact that everyone does work a little differently, and you should always feel free to adapt to your own needs. But I think for most people, it's helpful. Um, and particularly in things like in the second degree, where we're talking about palmistry in one chapter, having having charts of the hand and all the lines in the hand and the fingers, I think was probably helpful for people. Um, so the degree lessons again are highly illustrated. They have lots of charts, and they go through all the things that in the Corellian tradition you need for each of the three degrees, first, second, and third, and also contain large glossaries of words which if you are new to the path, you may not know yet. In some cases, even if you've been here for a while, you may not know. They also include biographies of people who are referred to in the text to give you an idea of why they're important to metaphysical subjects. Pythagoras, um, and many other Greek philosophers, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. They're all in there. I believe they're mostly in third degree. Some of them will show up in first or second. Plutarch shows up, I think, probably in first degree, because I know we refer to him there. Aristoclea, who was one of the teachers of Pythagoras, one of the Pythian oracles. Um, there are lots of interesting things, as well as instructions in the degree manuals. So those are there, and those are one of my probably by far my most sold books that I have created. Um, Also, most plagiarized. There was a time when I think I was definitely the most plagiarized pagan author in the early days of the internet because I was so easily accessible that for about 10 years, you would see my work showing up on other people's sites all over the place, which never particularly bothered me because I was more concerned that people were getting what I would consider to be good information. In that, I tend to differ from a lot of authors. Um, I would rather that people had the good information and didn't necessarily know where it came from than than that they not have the good information at all. So for a long time, for example, my definitions of the uses of herbs would show up on all kinds of herbal sites. Now that's less common now, but you go back to the early 2000s, and it was more common. And hello to Raven in the chat room. And Raven says, "Happy Odin's Day." Rev, thank you, Raven. Happy Odin's Day to you. Um, we also have Ritual in Theory and Practice. And if you're not familiar with Ritual in Theory and Practice book, let me explain what it is, because it might not be what you would think. It is about how to do ritual. But if you just want to know how to do ritual, in some ways the first degree book is better for that. This is how to do ritual with people. It's particularly about how you do ritual if you're heading a temple, if you're doing public ritual, if you're doing ritual with multiple people in any circumstance. This book was written for that purpose. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. And in my experience, I've been doing public ritual for a very, very long time, and I find it's very much its own technique. Doing private ritual for yourself or even yourself and maybe one other person is not nearly the same thing as doing public ritual. And there are a lot of things you need to be mindful of. And I always said that I didn't want to write a book unless I had something original to say. And I finally realized I had a number of original things to say about ritual, including the systematized way that I approach it, which I think makes it easier in general. I'm a great believer in systemizing things to give them a distinct recipe to follow, which for me makes everything easier. My book on ritual in theory and practice includes a number of ritual scripts, something I'm not all that thrilled with, but they're more to give ideas, not actual scripts. And every one of them includes several different possible acts of power. And it's meant to be a book for inspiring rather than dictating ritual ideas. I personally am a great believer in doing ritual basically from the heart. Um, if I'm doing ritual, I might have an order of service and an idea of how I'm going to go, but it's unlikely I'm going to have it written down, except for certain things like initiations, the lustrations in the years that I was heading them. Those things were always written down because of the nature of that particular ceremony. But ordinary ceremonies, I believe in basically doing off the cuff and from the heart and letting spirit guide you. And this book is intended to be a help with that, although you can use it more literally with the different ritual scripts that are included if you wish to do that. I realize, particularly when you're beginning, that can be very helpful. Ideally, in my mind, you learn all the different parts and put them in as you find you need them while you're doing it. When you're working with group ritual, everyone really is different. It depends in part on who's there. And you may find as you're doing it that spirit will move you to do things you were not expecting to do because it's needed for that occasion. And I think that is the best way to approach ritual. And this book does talk about that. It also talks about the very particular concerns um, of group ritual with the energy of the group, making sure that energy stays focused, being mindful of that energy. It's a very particular discipline. So that's another one of the books that we have at Corellian Publishing. And I want to thank um, other books that we have at Corellian Publishing. We have Reverend Don's books of questions. And there are 3 of these. Will be 4 eventually. And the books of questions um, are exactly what they sound like. And you probably know, or you may not know, that for about 10 years, I did a program called Reverend Don's Vlog. And Reverend Don's Vlog started out to be, I guess, a reality program of my life, but my life is boring. Um, and I quickly found that that was just not going to work. So instead, I started asking people what they'd like me to talk about. What questions might they have? What subjects would they like to discuss? And people rewarded me with the most wonderful questions that allowed me to address such a wide range of topics, um, ranging from deeply arcane um, subjects to historical matters to political matters. Um, to questions that seemed on the surface like they were just kind of silly, but really weren't. Probably one of the biggest compliments I've ever received was that I would answer everyone's question. And I'm not entirely sure if that was meant as a compliment, but I've always taken it as one. And I'm going to assume it was because my greatest delight in doing Reverend Don's vlog was when there was a question that I knew other people would have dismissed as a silly question, to be able to give a very serious, meaningful answer to that question. And I found there were many times I could do that. So, what are Reverend Don's books of questions? They're all those questions. Each one of the 3 existing volumes of Reverend Don's books of questions has 100 questions and answers from the vlog. There is a 4th volume waiting to be completed. And these are the best questions from that 10-year project. And pardon me for a moment. Excuse me. It's winter here in central Illinois. Today we are up to an amazing 20 degrees Fahrenheit. We're having a heat wave. And yeah, the nose is a bit obstreperous these days. But this is what Reverend Don's books of questions are about. We talk about everything from ghosts to poltergeists to aliens to mermaids to ritual questions to psychic practice to psychic development to the nature of the soul and incarnation. To some extent, if you can think of it and it's metaphysical, it's likely to be in there. Um, it was a wide-ranging series of questions, and I highly recommend them. They're very interesting. And again, you can find them at CorellianPublishing.com. And what other interesting books do I have at CorellianPublishing.com? Well, obviously, we have Reverend Don's Super Omnibus of Magical Incantations and Invocations for All Occasions, created by me and Sir Marianne Kay. And we have that available in a couple of different forms. And it is the collection of a series that we once did called mini spells. The mini spells included a piece of artwork and a spell, usually in the form of poetry. And I never really thought of myself as someone who was going to do a lot of poetry, but I did many poems for the mini spell project, and there are a few from other people as well. And we ended up putting this together. When we did the mini spell project, we, for whatever reason, decided we wanted to name a book that the mini spells came from. And we made it a bit of a joke and created this ridiculously long, strident name for the mythical book they had all come from. What turned out after we did that, people wanted the book. And eventually we put one together, and that is Reverend Don's Super Omnibus of Magical Incantations and Invocations for All Occasions. Available from CorellianPublishing.com and filled with artwork dating from the 1970s all the way up to just the last couple of years when the book came out. Some people enjoy having it as a coloring book because it's all the artwork is black and white. That's how these were originally printed. And if you happen to like coloring books, you can use it that way also. You can either color it directly in the book, or you can scan the pages and print them out and color them there. Reverend Michael says, I have the book. Thank you, Michael. I'm glad you have it. It's a huge retrospective, among other things, of my artwork. Speaking of coloring books, we also have Great Women of Antiquity, which is exactly what exactly meant to be a coloring book. And it is full of artwork depicting great women of antiquity, some of whom are very famous, some of whom are less famous, some of whom are simply interesting, ranging from the very first individual in history who Oberon Zell and Morning Glory Zell called Crooked Fox, who was a shaman living in the Paleolithic period, and she became the first individual in history due to the unusual circumstances of her death. When she was found by archaeologists, they found not only her body, they found the very first portrait of a human who could be identified with their body. This was because she had a particular formation to her jaw, which was slightly crooked and matched this image, which said pretty clearly, this is her. Also, the first person who could be matched to their fingerprint, because in addition to being a shaman, she had been a potter. And when she died, they burned down her house and her unfinished wares, which preserved her fingerprints. And she is the first individual in history for whom a portrait and fingerprints, as well as knowledge of her life, the things that she did, are all preserved. And she is the first entry in Great Women of Antiquity. But it goes on through many other figures, including Aristoclea, who we mentioned earlier, the Pythian prophetess, who was one of the teachers of Pythagoras, Theano, who was one of the heads of the Pythagorean school of thought later in time, a number of female Greek philosophers, a number of Egyptian figures, including political figures like Nefertiti and Cleopatra, but also medical figures and other figures out of Egyptian history you might not be familiar with, and the fact that they were women. The first named author in history, in Hedwana, of Akkad, who was a high priestess, who actually wrote a number of of hymns that she actually signed as author, making her the very first named author in history, which is quite a thing. And it goes through many of these fascinating figures. Um, so we have that available. And we also have at CorellianPublishing.com, we have the Common Book of Wicca and Witchcraft available as an ebook, which is not a book exclusively by me, and it was created by Sir Edward and edited by myself and Reverend Deb McGinley. And it is a Creative Commons license compilation of works by a number of prominent pagan figures. A great many things by myself, some things from Sir Edward, from Oberon Zell, from Abby Willowroot, from A.C. Fisher Aldag, and many, many other interesting people. I highly recommend it. It is available at CorellianPublishing.com. We have the Corellian Book of the Dead, one of our recent publications, available at CorellianPublishing.com. The Book of the Dead is exactly what it sounds like. And hello to Eve in the chat room. Eve says, I can't get sound. I don't know why that would be. Is anyone else having that problem? As far as I know, the sound is going out from my end because people have been responding to me, so they must be able to get it. Unless it's dropped out suddenly, and I don't know. I believe we have closed captions, so if you happen to see this question, even if you can't hear it, please let me know if you can't hear. And we'll see what we might be able to do. For Eve, I would say, maybe if you close out and come back, it might make a difference. I found sometimes that does. The Book of the Dead is, and Reverend Michael says they're getting sound perfectly fine. Dragon says, I'm still reading the Book of the Dead and find it interesting. The Book of the Dead is a compendium of Corellian views on death, the spirit world, working with the dead. It deals with things like how to venerate your ancestors, and more importantly, how to communicate with your ancestors. How to talks about how to bring through oracles, for example. It talks about the rites of death, the formal Corellian funeral, the funeral that I would expect to have when I die, that our beloved Lady Windy had when she died. And a few others have also had that relatively formal funeral. Talks about ancestor feasts. It talks about ancestor altars and how to create either a very conspicuous or a very subtle one. It talks about incarnation and reincarnation and conscious incarnation. It's quite a dense little book. It is focused on just that one subject, but from many different angles. And so the Book of the Dead is available. Now, the next book coming is Reverend Don's Book of Astrology. And this is expected around the spring equinox. It's being worked on now. And it is a book on astrological interpretation. And how do you interpret the elements of an astrological chart? I was asked the other night if it goes through different kinds of charts. Yeah, we might add that. But the elements will be applicable to any chart. Most people, unless they're very deep into astrology, deal with their natal chart most commonly. But there are many other ways of approaching astrological charts. But what matters in dealing with an astrological chart is the placement of the planets, the interpretation of the planets, and the aspects they make toward one another, the houses they appear in, etc., the signs that they appear in, etc. And this is what that book is about. And again, it is available for pre-sale with the intention of its ETA being around the spring equinox. And Um, After that, I'm thinking of another art book. Um, Although this is not an absolute statement of what the next book is going to be, it's where my mind is. It was recently suggested because one of the things we've talked about is creating a house of the ancestors or a physical temple here in Danville. And it's been suggested that some of my architectural drawings might make an interesting book. Some of the stained glass windows that I've designed, some of the other artwork ideas. And that's a thought that's kind of in process. And I'm curious if people would like to see that. Um, I do, years ago, I also did, in addition to the pagan work that I do, I did a lot of work in science fiction, which included a number of architectural ideas that would be part of those illustrations. And they were always quite popular. I think because I approached them from a different angle than many people did. And my attitude toward architecture, I'm a great believer in incorporating many different aspects in order to create something that is independent on its own. Um, Now, I'm not quite sure how to best describe that, but I like to have a mixture of very old elements and very new elements next to each other, because that to me is part of the nature of life. I often talk about we take forward the good from all of our experiences, and I don't see why that isn't true for architecture as well. One of the things in architecture that I've been most delighted by in, I'm not even sure I can say recent years now, it's starting to be a little more than recent, but the reintroduction of more complex architectural ornamentation to modern architectural designs. That mid-century box look had a great elegance of its own, but after a while, if you've seen one glass and steel box, you've seen all of them. And I much do prefer these somewhat more ornate styles of the past. And in my own designs, I like to mix these elements. So that might be one of the things coming in the future. Sitting in a box here in my office, we also have an already completed book of costume from antiquity that I did maybe 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, actually. No, it's closer to 30 years ago, which goes through costume as it was understood 30 years ago. Some of it might need a little modernization because of archaeological discoveries, but it deals with the costumes of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Crete, ancient Europe, and but it does it in the form of a paper doll book, which I don't know if people would have an interest in. Back in the day, I collected paper doll books as an artist because um, this was actually quite a great art form, and I believe it still has a wide following in that way. And some of them were wonderful compilations of historical or fantasy designs that you couldn't really find compiled elsewhere. And I decided to do one of my own. So that's sitting there waiting for possible publication as well. But these are some of the things that may come in the future. Again, if you're interested in any of the books I've talked about, you can find them at corellianpublishing.com. If you'd like to support my work in other ways, um, you can find my Patreon at revdonlewis.com. And of course, I'm always available for readings, and you can simply instant message me at Facebook to set one up, or you can email me at donlewishp@aol.com. I have had that same email address since 1994, maybe? A very long time. And so anyone who tells you that they don't know how to find me, uh, it obviously isn't true, because I've deliberately kept that address for that reason, among others. Um, because people who know me from years ago do know how to find me. And every now and then, someone I haven't heard from a long time will say hello, and I love when that happens. And speaking of things I love spending this time with you. I hope that you enjoy it also. I hope you've enjoyed this show, and I'll be back tomorrow. And I will tell you that Friday is going to be a best of, um, but I will be back live tomorrow, and we will continue our midday conversations. And thank you all for joining me, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in this walk we walk together. We ask you to help us as we go forward, to carry forward those good things that come into our lives and leave behind those things that are less pleasant, so that we constantly improve our lives. Help us always to see the good that's everywhere around us, and to build up more and more good in this world. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you tomorrow.